800, climb maintain 15,000. Paris 800, heavy, climb and maintain 15,000, leaving 3,000. We just saw an explosion out here, Sandy 507. Sandy 507, I'm sorry, I missed it. You're on 18, did you say something else? We just saw an explosion below us. There's someone about 16,000 feet or something like that. It just went down to the water. Boston Virgin 009, I can confirm that out of my 9 o'clock position. We just had looked like an explosion out there about 5 miles away, 6 miles away. Should be 800, Jenna. TWA 800, Jenna. TWA 800 is the air center ident. TWA 800, center. I think that was him. I think so. God bless him.
Welcome to Independent Aircraft Investigations. My name is Richard Godfrey. Today, I'm delighted to say, joined by Captain Al Francis, a former TWA 747 captain, and someone who's been following closely the investigation into TWA 800. Al, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're quite welcome. I appreciate you asking me to participate.
So recently we had the Judicial Watch documentary, which I thought was very good, and we will include a link to the YouTube recording of that documentary for any viewers who have not yet seen it. What was your opinion, Al, of the documentary?
I thought it was excellent. Of course, Judicial Watch is a very well-respected group here in the United States that attempts to do FOIA requests and so forth to bring out information that the government agencies would not otherwise agree to share. And they, I think, on the 30th anniversary of the crash of TWA 800, were very, very well set to be able to file FOIA requests and get some of the information that should have long since been released by the NTSB and the FBI and some of the other government agencies, but was not. And their knowledge of how to complete these FOIA requests and get the answers was quite a wonderful thing. So I was very pleased. I was pleased with the people that were involved, Professor Stalkup, myself, a couple of the witnesses, and of course Jack Cashel, who had written extensively on this for a long period of time. I'm the only one of the group that were on the documentary that was there from the very beginning. I mean, literally the night that it happened, and then the next day, and for many days thereafter. And I witnessed more than anything else the actions of the FBI as opposed to the NTSB in this investigation. And I had been involved in other safety issues in the past, and it was astounding to me very quickly, obvious that this was not going the way normal NTSB investigations were going. And the FBI had come in, several hijackings that we had on TWA, and had been very heavy-handed, if I might say, to the crews and the people that were involved in the hijackings. So that was to be expected, but not the withholding of information that they did. And that was all brought out pretty well in the documentary. So I was pleased to be part of that, and I was very happy that an organization like Judicial Watch would be willing to do it.
Yeah, it was an excellent documentary. and I strongly recommend viewers to watch it if they haven't already. And I get the impression that the NTSB had to almost fight with the FBI and the CIA and the NSA to be able to do their job. And it makes you wonder whether the investigation was compromised because of information that was not forthcoming from all of these other government agencies.
Well, as you understand, there are specific protocols involved with a National Transportation Safety Board investigation. They have many experts in many fields, not only aviation, but those people and the go teams that are involved to an investigation, and they go all over the world. They have helped many other countries do their investigations because of the extent of knowledge that they have. And as I said in my documentary, was mentioned also in the Judicial Watch documentary, the people in the NTSB, the on-the-ground people, the go team, etc., including the head of that, Hank Hughes, were just aghast at what was going on. It total violation of protocol, total violation of one of the things which is so important is maintaining a complete list and inventory of any wreckage which is recovered. And much of that at the dock in Calverton before it went to the hangar was being taken by the FBI and in some cases pressure washed, which removed traces of any residue that might have been on the material, as well as the grease pencil markings that indicated where it was discovered on the floor of the ocean. These were gross violations, and the NTSB also noted that the FBI was taking some of the pieces at random and placing them in vans, not in the hangar where they would be documented as they normally were. And they were informed by the FBI personnel that these were being taken to the FBI laboratories in Washington for testing, and the results of that testing, as well as the material itself, would be returned to the NTSB and to the Calverton hangar. But because of the fact that none of it was actually cataloged in, as was the natural procedure, they had no knowledge whether all of that material was indeed returned to the site.
Yeah, it's just an incredible story. So, Al, what is your personal view about the cause of the crash? And has the documentary confirmed your view or brought new information to light for you?
Well, I was interested about the claim by the group in Cairo that claimed that they had shot the airplane down. As you and I have discussed, there are many groups that routinely, anytime anything happens with an airplane or any violent act, they have claimed responsibility, whether they had anything to do with it or not. So I don't know whether that's true, but basically my feelings are the same as they were. I feel that a minimum of two missiles, possibly three, impacted the aircraft. I think one of the missiles was definitely fired from a small boat underneath the flight track of TWA 800 by a terrorist group. It was a rail-fired, probably missile, ground-to-air missile that did the initial damage to the airplane. And this was, I think, proven by some of the radar material that Dr. Stalkov was able to pull out and bring out, and of course was ignored by the FBI, that showed a large amount of material exiting the right side of the airplane at very high speed shortly before the airplane actually exploded. This was probably the first terrorist missile exploding on the left-hand side of the airplane which shattered the top of the left wing, detached one of the engines, and caused the fuel that was in the left wing to exit the aircraft, and that showed as the white plume of vapor that many witnesses indicated seeing prior to the massive explosion of petroleum fuel. Again, there are two types of explosions. One is a high velocity explosion, which would occur when a missile would explode either on or near in proximity to the airplane. And then a low velocity explosion, which is much more dramatic because of the burning and expansion of the burning of petroleum. And that's what so many people witnessed from the air and also from the ground and the ocean, this enormous explosion, petroleum explosion. This thing occurred again after the initial explosions that were witnessed by people like Major Fritz Meyer and his co-pilot and other military personnel flying a 130 and people on the ground. They witnessed something rise off the surface of the ocean and explode as a bright flash prior to the airplane coming apart and the massive petroleum explosion. Again, none of this information, unfortunately, was included in the initial report or the final probable cause report by the NTSB, and this was unbelievable. Even the NTSB people involved, including Hank Hughes, could not believe it. They had never seen anything like this in their long careers. In case of Hank Hughes, well over 20 years career of investigating accidents, he'd never seen anything like this before, and indeed before his retirement.
One of the things that I reported on before is the number of radar facilities in the area. There are over 50 different types of radar, from commercial aircraft, military aircraft, naval radar, and so on. And none of the radar data, with one exception from North Truro, the NOR installation, none of that radar data has actually been published. And the North Truro is 145 nautical miles away from the accident. So you can imagine the primary radar data is beyond its limit of 100 nautical miles, where it starts to get quite inaccurate. So it's not that helpful. And I know that Dr. Thomas Stalkup has looked at the ISLIP radar, which is a much closer radar system to where the accident happened. And I think the radar that should be published so that we can all take a look at the radar data if indeed it proves that a missile struck the aircraft.
Well, indeed, and again, I think I've mentioned to you before that I was contacted after I did my initial presentation on this and gave it to audiences around the country. I was contacted by a gentleman by the name of a former United Airlines Captain Dick Russell, who called me and said, I have information to give you, but I don't want to give it to you over the phone. Can you come to my home in North Florida and I'll provide it to you? So I drove from my residence at the time, Hilton Head, South Carolina. I drove down to just north of Daytona Beach and visited him, Captain Russell, at his home. And at that time, he told me a very, very interesting story. And that was that the day after, the morning after TWA 800 went down, he was contacted by a friend of his who was an official at what is referred to as TRACON, which is the radar facility that handles the departure and arrival of aircraft into the New York area, all the airports, including Newark, Kennedy, LaGuardia, Westchester County, Islip, etc. And he said, when Dick got up to him, he said, "I want to show you this radar tape, which I have a copy of." He said this was very quickly confiscated by the FBI, which is completely illegal. That's supposed to be maintained for a minimum, I believe, of 6 months afterward in case there is any incident that needs to be investigated. And he showed Dick this radar tape, and the radar tape showed something, a non-transponder, what's referred to as a skin paint image on the radar, on the TRACON radar, which is very good radar, and it showed something proceeding at very, very high speed, well over Mach 2, toward TWA 800 and its transponder target. They, at very shortly thereafter, this radar tape started. It showed that skin paint object merge with TWA's transponder return, and at that point, both of them disappeared from the scope. So this was pretty obviously something that had hit TWA, and he had a copy of this. He gave then a copy of that to Captain Russell, who went back down to Florida and wrote an article for his local newspaper, because, of course, this was in the news all over the country, that indicated this. And he also went, the day after that article was published in his local newspaper, he went to what is referred to as a quiet birdman. That's an aviation enthusiast club at the airport, and he gave a presentation to the people telling that this had happened. This was something of very interest to everybody. The day after that, early in the morning, he had a knock on the door, and he said he opened the door, and there, standing in the early morning Florida heat and humidity, were two people that he described as wearing black raincoats, having dark glasses on, showed identification that indicated they were FBI agents, and demanded that he return this VCR tape that he had of this missile, obviously, or this skin paint hitting TWA. They said that either he gave that to them instantly or he would be arrested and incarcerated. So he quickly went and got the tape and gave it to them, and they left. What they were unaware of was that he had made copies of this, DVD copies of this, and had them available. And that was what he showed me at the time. And there was no doubt about the fact that it was something traveling very rapidly horizontally and merging with the TWA transponder. And there was no doubt in my mind at that time that at least something, one thing, had hit the airplane. Of course, this apparently was actually given by someone to one of the local TV stations in the New York area, and it was shown several times that night, the night of the crash, and then disappeared. It was obviously confiscated and never came out again. So this type of thing that occurred was very interesting to me after the fact. And Dick Russell provided a tremendous amount of information. He was elderly and in bad health at the time, and he provided this information to me so it would not be lost. And I appreciate it, and I still have that in my my files at the time.
That's a fascinating story. And there are 755 witness statements, which I've now gone through all of them, and they tell also an incredible story. out of these statements, there are 755 mentions of flares um, seen going up around where TWA crashed. And people also mention that the trails of smoke behind these flares. And then there are 208 people who mention a streak of light going up from the ocean towards the aircraft. And 200 people actually say it was a missile. 194 thought it was fireworks going off, and 162 mentioned that there were flashes of light. So there was a lot going on at the time, and a lot of people reported this. But I think none of these witness statements were ever allowed in the Baltimore hearing. Is that true?
That's absolutely true. And as Jack Haschel pointed out in his portion of the Judicial Watch documentary, there was an individual that is referred to as witness number 73. And she was a woman that, because of her location at a restaurant outside on the shore of the South Shore of Long Island, was perhaps saw the best view of everything that occurred from the initial rise of something off the water to the explosions next to the airplane to the massive petroleum explosion and the both pieces of wreckage descending into the water. She gave a very detailed report after she had called the FBI, and they filed it in their normal witness reporting form. And it was interesting because later on, she supposedly had filed an amended report stating that she had been drinking something called Long Island iced teas, which is a very highly alcoholic drink, and perhaps was somewhat befuddled and recanted her statements of what she had seen that night. The only problem, as she pointed out to Jack Cashel when he talked to her, was she said, I don't know what a Long Island iced tea is. And he said, well, perhaps could it have been some other alcoholic beverage that we're drinking? And she said, Mr. Cashel, I am a teetotaler. I don't drink alcohol at all. And furthermore, there was no second interview by the FBI. That was totally fabricated on their point, which astounded Jack. And but she said that was the case, that there had never been a second interview. So anything indicated by the FBI as far as information that was given to them was totally fraudulent, and it makes you wonder what other information that they stated that they had as far as these various witness statements was incorrect as well, or incomplete, perhaps I should say.
Well, I think it's high time that the FBI finally released the unredacted versions of all of these witness statements, so
Absolutely, I agree.
so that we can all take a look. And at the moment, we have the redacted statements, but there are quite a lot of black lines through and crossing stuff out, so you can't read it. What interested me was, in particular, 36 of those witnesses were airborne at the time in the vicinity of the TWA 800 crash. And I've now analyzed all of those witness statements, all 36. Obviously includes commercial and military pilots. It also includes passengers who had window seats, and one aircraft, US Air Flight 217, was only 2.8 nautical miles away from the TWA accident. And all of the passengers on the right-hand side of the aircraft reported what they had seen. And there are 8 witness statements recorded by the FBI, including one naval officer who was on his way to Rhode Island. And he gave a very complete report to the Naval Criminal Investigation Services, which is on the record. And another one of these expert witnesses was a commercial airline pilot who was brought in and interviewed by the NTSB, the FAA, and the FBI. And his statement is on the record. And he also made a very thorough and complete report of what he observed. And then there was 2 military crews from the National Guard, one on a helicopter, an HH-60, and the other crew in a C-130. And both were very close to where TWA accident took place. And both of them, all the crew members, there were 4 on the helicopter and 6 on the C-130. All of them gave detailed interviews to the NTSB, the FAA, and the FBI. And it's incredible the precise detail of these interviews and the information, of course, with military training, with pilot training, and the C-130 actually had trained observers on board. They didn't miss a thing. And they were very thorough, reporting the visibility was good, reporting exactly the altitude, the direction, the bearing from where they were observing, the distances involved. It makes for an incredible story. But all of this seems to have been lost in the official report and in the hearings since.
Again, for whatever reason, I have my opinions on that, and I can't state them as fact because I don't know the facts, but I have my opinions of what occurred. But there's no doubt that a vast amount of information has come out after the fact and actually was there during the original investigation, but just not considered, not used as part of the documentation that they would come up with a probable cause. As a result, even Hank Hughes, who was the part of the original Go team there that arrived, after he retired, joined other people requesting, including Dr. Stalkop, that the investigation be reopened and considered all the information that you have indicated was available to them but not used. And the NTSB came out with a rather lame excuse saying that they didn't believe that the radar that was being referred to by Dr. Stalkop and others was valid and useful, but they instead of referred to that facility that you talked about that was over 100 miles away and would not be nearly as good radar and accurate as ones that were much closer to the fact. The NTSB, as such, refused to even consider reopening the investigation, and that their reason for doing so, as I said, was unbelievable. They were lame excuse.
Well, it begs the question, what does it take to get the investigation reopened then?
Well, what it's going to take, and I hope all politics out of consideration here, I hope that the current administration under President Trump, with all of the problems and all of the considerations we have going on now, including the war in Iran, etc., will take the time to direct both the FAA and the NTSB to reopen the investigation. It will not be a financial burden, particularly to the country, because all the information, as you have rightly pointed out, has already been gathered. It's there. They just haven't considered it. So the investigation being reopened is not one that they're going to have to spend vast amounts of time investigating. They have to just begin to look through these documents and determine what they say and their relevance to what happened to the airplane on that night. I believe that there is a good possibility that this will occur. One of the things I thought was driving it was a lawsuit bought by the family of Oliver Frisch, the student flight engineer on the flight, and other relatives of crew members and people that died that night. It was filed in federal court in Massachusetts, but unfortunately, the court up there determined that it didn't have sufficient information to justify it and dismiss the case, but they didn't dismiss it in a form that would prevent it from being refiled. And I believe right now there is an effort to get a lawyer that specializes in appeals of this decision to be acquired and refile the court or the lawsuit perhaps in a different venue than Massachusetts. That again is another thing that could sort of force the government to reconsider and the NTSB. But President Trump could do this with the stroke of a pen, with a phone call to the FAA and to the NTSB and say, I want this done, and people would do it. So it is my great hope that politics not considered, that he will do that and allow this information, which is non-political, should be non-political, to be used, and allow the families of those that died that night to finally not only know what happened to their loved ones, but also if indeed it was the Navy, as you say. I believe the Navy was one of the missiles that hit the airplane, that they should be compensated financially for their loss. And as of this time, none of them, 30 years later, none of them have received any compensation whatsoever at all. That's just not right, especially considering the fact that when the Navy in 1988 shot down an Iranian jet departing Tehran and out over the Red Sea in a mistake, believing it was an airplane that was attacking the missile cruiser. When they shot that down, there were compensation paid to the families of the people deceased, and all some 260 of them died in that crash. None of the 230 families that were involved in TWA 800 have received a dime to this point, and that's just not right.
I thought there had been a number of out-of-court settlements and money paid by TWA and by Boeing and others.
That may be true from TWA and from from Boeing, but to the best of my knowledge, nothing has come out of the government, because the government has admitted absolutely no culpability in this, and they are the ones that I think indeed are the deep pockets. TWA obviously no longer exists. My airline was acquired in 2001 by American Airlines, and they didn't accept any of the liabilities, including the retirement abilities, which has cost me a considerable amount of money over the years since. But they didn't accept any of the responsibilities for actions taken by TWA prior to that point. And the crash of TWA 800 indeed was sort of the nail in the coffin of the once great airline TWA that many people around the world flew on during its 70 plus year history.
I think what we're all interested in is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Absolutely. And again, I cannot say that I am an uninterested party. Again, there were many of the people that died that night were TWA employees. Many of them were personal friends of mine, and I feel the grief of that incident to this day, as do many of the surviving TWA employees. But we're all growing older, and this has to be dealt with as soon as possible because the witnesses, even though they have already given their testimony, are gradually passing on. And as they pass on and I pass on and others, the information and input that I can give will be gone, will be unavailable anymore. And that would be a tragedy. So, as I say, I hope the documentary by Judicial Watch, the documentary that I did that is available on YouTube. All you have to do is go to YouTube and type in Captain Al Francis, and it'll provide a bunch of different things that I have participated in over a period of time, including some with you. And I hope that they will do that and they will pressure the government to go ahead and do this while they still can before the witnesses are no longer with us.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. So, Al, thank you very much for joining me today, and we will continue to do episodes on TWA 800 in the coming months. As soon as any new information comes to light, we'll be bringing it to the viewers. And thank you very much for your time.
Well, you're welcome. And as I said, I mentioned some names to you privately and previously that I think we ought to try to contact if they're still here. Again, this was 30 years ago, and a lot of people are no longer here. Professor Stalkop or Dr. Stalkop is, and he was a young man at the time. All of us were considerably older, but I believe some are still there, and I will do what I can to help you contact them, and perhaps they can join us and join you on these programs. It's a very vital task.
Thank you very much indeed.
Have a good day.